Alright guys, it's time to finally try the Breakfast Stout, my first all-grain beer in a very long time. I've shared the journey with you guys, so here we go. It's been in the bottle for like 12 days, so I'm going to my local homebrewing club meeting in 2 days, so if it's not 100% carbonated yet, I'll have 2 more days to let it carbonate, so let's hope for the best. I did get this nice and chilled down, so you have a nice hiss and it's not overflowing. I do have a towel here just to make sure it doesn't get all over the place, but it seems to be pretty carbonated. So, and I'm using my Captain Lawrence glass because instead of maybe a Nonic glass, which you would use for an oatmeal stout, I want to use this glass to get the aroma. So pours pretty carbonated, a lot of bubbles, so it might be a little over carbonated for a stout. I might let it sit out, but it does have about a 1 finger off-white, almost brown head, and obviously a black body because it's a breakfast stout with a ton of caramel malts and chocolate malt and roasted barley. So beyond the carbonation, let's get the aroma. Really interesting. You can definitely smell the oats and the chocolate. The coffee actually faded out a lot. It's actually really, I think the coldness actually is muting it because I put it in the freezer for a few minutes to make sure that by the time I tasted it, it would be nice and cold, but it might be too cold. Because I'm getting a little bit of the chocolate, but not too much anything else, so let's give it a taste. Cheers. Oh, whoa, that's good. So the coffee actually faded a lot. I think I underestimated, I thought that it was overpower the beer. So I used a lot less than the scaled up amount. So next time I brew with coffee, I'll know that I can use the full scaled up amount and it'll age out. Because, oh, this tastes really good, it's still, the coffee isn't there. So it tastes like the base beer with more carbonation and a little more chocolate. So, that's my initial reaction. Very chocolatey, very nice, creamy. So I'm going to go ahead, drink a little more, and then come back with that bottle of the base beer that I ghetto bottled. Alright, cheers. Alright guys, so we're back with my breakfast stout. The biggest overarching thing is that I should not have scaled down the coffee because I can't really taste it. It still has a nice chocolatey flavor. There's a little weird flavor that's coming in now that I can't really describe, but first I'm going to do the ghetto bottled base beer, which has no cocoa nibs and no coffee in it. What I did was the ghetto bottle it. What I meant, I think I mentioned it in a previous video, is I took the bottom of my beer thief and I put it in my funnel, and then I poured the beer in that way to save some of the beer because my siphon stopped early when I was transferring it to secondary and I had a lot of leftover beer. So let's see what happens with this. Hope it doesn't explode on me or anything, but it's definitely carbonated and it's not exploding, so let's see what happens. And it's been in the bottle for 3.5 weeks because it was there for the 8.5 days of secondary and then the almost 2 weeks of conditioning. So it actually smells pretty much the same. Luckily it doesn't smell like it's infected or anything. It smells a little roastier, I think. That's the only real difference. Yeah, it tastes less chocolatey and doesn't have as much, it has a little more roastiness than this one. But overall, to get back to the final product, the only real caveat I have is that I should not have scaled down the coffee. Otherwise, for my first attempt, It's a little rough around the edges now, but as some of you homebrewers might know, stouts are known to take longer to condition and come to their prime in the bottle, especially when you bottle it. So I guess I'll do updates on this every few weeks when I'll be drinking it on my homebrewing videos, and we'll see how it develops over time. But again, cheers to you guys for all your advice over the past month or so, getting back into homebrewing, back into all grain brewing, and I look forward to sharing my next homebrew adventure with you guys. Alright? Cheers, and see you at Homebrew Wednesday. Alright guys, so that was my first reaction to my breakfast stout. So last night, as I said, the next part I'm talking about is last night's homebrew club meeting, and then I'll wrap up the brew. I'll pour this bottle into my new Brooklyn glass and talk a little bit more about the beer. So just to break things up, I was gonna film a little bit at the homebrew club meeting, but it didn't end up working out that way. I realized that after going to a couple meetings now that it's so casual there. Like, they didn't have a set speaker, like guest honored speaker, so it was a little more casual. And what we did was we went through 3 beer styles, you know, and then the president, vice president, and secretary of the club, you know, each split up the styles and gave the BJCP guidelines, and then we tasted first a commercial example and then went around the room, you know, discussing our thoughts, and then you know, a homebrew example from one of the heads of the club was served, and then we compared and contrasted and discussed our views on the styles. So the 3 styles were, first we did Oktoberfest, and I wrote a few notes in my little book here. So we had the Stouts Oktoberfest and the Stouts Brewery from Pennsylvania, from Adamstown, Pennsylvania, and it was a pretty good, you know, pretty good Oktoberfest beer. Actually, that's one of the American Oktoberfest I don't believe I had before last night. It was pretty good, and it wasn't as sweet as some of the classic German Oktoberfest, and it didn't have a big noble hop character, but it still was Oktoberfest that I could see myself buying and sessioning because it's not too sweet and not too bitter. Then the homebrewed version, which he gave us, you know, what malts he used and how he deviated from the classic, you know, style, where he used more Munich and Crystal and Melanoidin malts instead of using Vienna malt, which is very popular in Oktoberfest. But he did use Hallertau hops, and he used a dry lager yeast because that's what he had on. So it was a really cool, you know, to discuss that style, even though it's way past the Oktoberfest season right now. Then quickly, the next style was the oatmeal stout. So the commercial example was the classic Sam Smith's oatmeal stout. And I hadn't had it in a while, so it was good to taste that. I tasted some cocoa notes and roastiness and chocolatiness and some creaminess. You know, everything that makes it a classic version of the style. And then the homebrewed version was a little creamier than the Sam Smith's, but it wasn't as well rounded, but it still had a perfect creaminess, that balanced roastiness, some chocolate flavor, and a nice lingering finish. So that was that, and that was brewed by the president of the club, and the Oktoberfest was the vice president, and then the secretary of the club, he brewed an IPA, and the next style was the last and third last style was the American IPA. So we had the 2 commercial examples, first of which I had was the Firestone Walker Union Jack, a really classic, juicy American IPA, which Firestone Walker's hoppy beers are amazing, just as amazing as their barrel-aged stuff. And then we discussed that a little bit, and a little bit about West Coast hops, a little bit about German hops, since we just had Oktoberfest, and how, you know, really the American West Coast hops really create their own style, and how other countries are trying to imitate that with their hops or American hops that they import. It was a really cool conversation. And then we did a really cool homebrewed one, which is actually dry hopped like Firestone Walker, with, you know, doing one set of hops for 3 days, taking it out, and then putting another set of hops for another 3 days. so that you don't get any vegetal dry hopped, taste in their beer, and you get a really juicy, fresh dry hopping. So I might actually try doing that next time I brew a hoppy beer. And then we went around tasting each other's home brews, and I brought the bomber that I had got when I bottled, because I got towards the end of my bottling day. I filled up a bomber after I finished most of my 12-ounce bottles, and I brought 2 12-ounces with me, but I ended up going through one, but because we poured everyone really small samples. But I did try, I'll get into what people thought about it in a second, but I did, some of the interesting beers I tried last night were a pumpkin saison, which was really interesting. You could taste the saison notes in the finish, but the pumpkin was up front. Petite saison, so like a lower ABV saison, a mosaic pale ale, a couple rye pale ales, a blackberry Hefeweizen, which was really refreshing, a peanut butter porter, which ended up really tasting like a peanut butter sour almost. It had like a peanut butter up front. You used dried peanut butter, and then it had a tart finish. So it was pretty good. I can't say I would brew one myself, but it tasted like a peanut butter sour. It was really interesting. And then the last two were a mango chili IPA, which is really cool. You get the mango-y hops and the real mango he used, and then the chili with the hop bitterness in the finish. It was really nice. And then a really authentic Helles Lager from one of the members who's a BJCP judge who actually teaches classes in New York. So the big thing from last night was that somehow the bottles I opened had a perfect coffee character. And as you saw in my initial reaction to my first bottle I opened, I hardly tasted any coffee, and I was a little disappointed by how the flavors didn't really balance out. So let's open this bottle, and then I'll give my wrap up to my breakfast stout. So nice hiss. I'm pouring it into my new Brooklyn glass, which I showed you a few weeks ago. It's definitely nice and carbonated. Alright, so it's definitely more of a brown than a black color, but see, as you see here, with the 2 or 3 extra days, it has a lot more carbonation, about a 2.5 finger head, and aroma. It has a really nice, this bottle actually smells, the coffee's coming through more in the aroma than it was a few days ago, but definitely this bottle smells very similar to the first bottles, but definitely the coffee is definitely coming out. So let's take a sip. Yeah, so the big difference within a few days, I think there's going to be some bottle-to-bottle variation with the coffee flavor, but the real difference is that with the age, which a lot of people were telling me after I posted the update, I should let it age. The big difference is that the coffee is coming out more as it ages. So, next time I probably will still add a tiny bit more coffee. It's still a pretty good stout, and the bottles that I opened, the 2 bottles that I opened at the homebrew meeting were very coffee forward, so people really liked it. Some people said to add less coffee next time because the pour I gave them was very coffee forward, but overall, everyone liked it. So I'm looking forward to sending out a few bottles to a few people who really gave me a lot of advice for this brew. But overall, while I'd rather have had it taste good off the bat, I think as it ages, it's gonna, even if the coffee fades and there's variation between bottles, overall, I think this is like a flavor of a stout that I could really warm up to and enjoy. So overall, with things that I would change for this brew is, of course, the first thing, like I've mentioned a million times in my videos about it, is temperature controlling. I should not have jumped to the conclusion that my closet was cooling down after a week of fermentation so I could take it out of the fermenter out of the water bath. I should have just kept it in there, because when I opened it after the fermenter, when I was about to transfer it the beer to the secondary, the coconut, I could smell a huge waft of alcohol. So that means that, you know, it fermented too hot at certain points. And one main thing that my temperature control fridge will help with is consistency of temperature, because there was, in the midst of fermentation, I went away for weekends. Like I would be away from my apartment from like Friday afternoon till Saturday night or Sunday morning, and I'd come back and rush to switch the water bottles, frozen water bottles. So like that's not a real good way to manage fermentation, because I think I read on Homebrew Talk, like it's not like the yeast fermenting at a higher temperature of in the range for that yeast that causes off flavors. It's the fluctuation of temperature that causes off flavors. So this beer's fermentation fluctuated a ton. So I think that's why, you know, there is, I think, a slight off flavor in this, because I'm having a hard time getting the smell out of the fermenter, the bucket that I used. And I think it's like a combination of the chocolatiness of the stout and the plastic of the fermenter. I don't know why that would happen, but maybe because I put it in there too hot to begin with. But anyway, I'm sure that some of that will age out over time. But just again, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I want to be able to manage the brew in the temperature controlled fridge. I won't have to worry about going away for a day, because the SDC 1000 that I'll be building will do that. And so by the next time I brew, I have I have two different project boxes that I got at Radio Shack, so I won't have to worry about that anymore. And then next Homebrew Wednesday, hopefully I'll have it built for you and be able to show you the footage of building it. And then with overall with the recipe, I want to add more roasted barley so that I have a little bit more of a base roastiness. So even if I fluctuate the amount of coffee up or down, I'll still have a base roastiness. But overall, I really like the recipe, the malt bill and the hop bill, and the yeast selection. And hopefully I'll have a stir plate by the time I brew this recipe next. I don't know when that'll be. It might be a year. But I have it on my brew tote account. So if I want to brew this as my fall beer next year, I'll definitely brew it again. You know, I'll do that so that I can see the full potential of the recipe. Even if I use a different blend of coffee, I still want to see, you know, the potential of the recipe. So maybe I'll even split it up to like 2 3-gallon batches or something like that to see one without coffee and one with coffee. But overall, I learned a lot. You know, I realized that, you know, there's a lot I need to learn. You know, because I thought I knew a lot about home brewing, and I really didn't. And of course, every batch is a learning experience for no matter how experienced of a home brewer you are. But for me, you know, thinking that I knew a good amount to like get this new equipment and have a really successful first batch, I think I was kind of fooling myself that everything would go perfectly, but obviously it didn't. But overall, it was a really good learning experience, and I welcome you guys' feedback. And one last thing to conclude this video is like I said on Monday, I did start editing the promo video. So if there's things that you really want to see in the promo video, let me know in the comments so that I can include them. But it should be pretty cool. I have some really cool ideas for it. So cheers, and keep on brewing, and don't get discouraged when things get effed up. Cheers.